The death of Luna Nozawa was announced with a certainty that left no room for doubt, at least on the surface. Official statements were delivered with solemn precision, condolences followed predictable paths, and the world was told that a young woman's life had ended in tragedy. Yet beneath the carefully constructed narrative lay a silence that was too deliberate, too clean. There was no body to mourn, no physical proof to anchor grief in reality, only paperwork, sealed reports, and the unspoken insistence that questions were no longer welcome. For many, that absence faded into the background, rationalized as an unfortunate consequence of chaotic circumstances. For others, especially those whose lives had once orbited dangerously close to Luna's, the lack of tangible evidence planted a seed of unease. Death without a body is not an ending. It is a pause masquerading as finality, a door closed without the sound of a lock clicking into place. Luna understood this better than anyone. Her decision to fake her own death was not born from impulse or panic alone, but from a slow, grinding realization that survival sometimes demands erasure. In the weeks leading up to her disappearance, she had felt the walls tightening around her, pressure building from every direction. Secrets she once believed she could control had begun to surface in distorted forms, whispered by people who misunderstood her motives and judged her without ever seeing the full picture. Luna had always lived in the space between perception and truth, crafting versions of herself that served the moment, believing she could always adjust, always pivot. But this time, the narrative threatened to spin beyond her control. To stay visible was to be destroyed. To vanish was to reclaim power. Faking death required a level of emotional detachment that surprised even her. Luna mourned herself in advance, severing ties not only with people, but with the identity she had worn so carefully. The process was meticulous, calculated, and chillingly calm. She studied the mechanics of disappearance, the bureaucratic loopholes, the ways institutions prefer closure over complication. She exploited assumptions, relied on the collective desire for an ending, and used it as camouflage. When the announcement of her death finally came, Luna watched from the shadows, absorbing the reactions with a complex mixture of relief and resentment. Some faces showed genuine sorrow, others displayed a relief that cut deeper than outright hatred. Each response confirmed her belief that remaining present would have meant surrendering herself to a narrative written by others. From her hidden vantage point, Luna's attention narrowed toward two people she could not release from her thoughts, Will and Electra. Their lives, once entangled with hers in ways both intimate and destructive, continued without her, unfolding as if her absence were a necessary correction rather than a loss. Watching them from afar became both a compulsion and a punishment. She followed fragments of their story, through indirect channels, through conversations overheard, articles read in passing, and the quiet intelligence she had always possessed. Will and Electra represented the future she had been denied, the stability and happiness that seemed to flourish precisely because she was no longer there to complicate it. This realization gnawed at her, transforming guilt into bitterness and longing into something sharper, more dangerous. Distance did not bring clarity, it magnified obsession. Luna told herself she was only observing, only ensuring that her disappearance had truly erased her from their lives. But the truth was more unsettling. She was measuring herself against them, calculating what had been taken from her and what she believed she was owed. Each sign of their happiness felt like a verdict, a confirmation that the world had chosen them over her. The child at the center of this emerging narrative became the focal point of Luna's internal conflict, a symbol of everything unresolved. The knowledge that Katie and Bill were preparing to adopt her child struck Luna with the force of betrayal layered upon betrayal. What had once been framed as necessity now felt like theft. Motherhood for Luna had always been complicated. It was never simply about nurturing or sacrifice. It was entangled with identity, control, and redemption. The child represented proof of her existence, an anchor to a world that had otherwise found it convenient to erase her. Learning that Katie and Bill intended to step into that role ignited a fury that eclipsed her earlier resolve to remain hidden. Luna's carefully constructed detachment fractured under the weight of maternal instinct and wounded pride. She began to see the adoption not as an act of generosity or stability, but as the final confirmation that her life could be repurposed without her consent. As Luna's fixation deepened, so did her rationalizations. She convinced herself that returning was not an act of selfishness, but of justice. The child was hers, born from her body, shaped by her choices, and no legal document or well-intentioned couple could change that fundamental truth. In her mind, Will and Electra's happiness had been built on a lie, on the assumption that Luna was gone forever. By reappearing, she would not be destroying their lives. She would be restoring balance. This reframing allowed Luna to suppress doubt and guilt, replacing them with a sense of moral urgency that bordered on delusion. The timing of her return was not accidental. Luna waited, watching as preparations for the adoption progressed, as emotional bonds deepened and expectations solidified. She understood that impact requires precision. To return too early would invite containment, dismissal, or legal maneuvering. To return too late would mean losing leverage. She chose the moment when Katie and Bill stood on the threshold of permanence, when signatures were nearly inked and futures mentally rehearsed. At that point, Luna's reappearance would not merely disrupt, it would devastate. When Luna finally stepped back into the light, the shock was seismic. Her presence shattered the illusion of closure that everyone had relied upon. Faces drained of color, words failed, and the carefully maintained composure of those present collapsed under the weight of impossibility. Luna was supposed to be dead, a chapter closed, a tragedy processed and filed away. Her living, breathing reality forced everyone to confront their own assumptions, their own willingness to accept convenient truths. For Will and Electra, the impact was especially brutal. Their sense of safety, of earned peace, fractured instantly, replaced by a resurgence of fear they had believed buried. Luna's demand for her child was not delivered with hesitation or apology. It was framed as reclamation, as a correction of an injustice. She spoke with the authority of someone who had rehearsed this moment countless times, each word sharpened by months of isolation and resentment. To her, this was not a negotiation. It was an assertion of existence, a refusal to remain invisible. The child, oblivious to the emotional warfare unfolding, became the silent axis around which every conflict revolved. For Katie and Bill, Luna's return posed an ethical and emotional crisis that defied simple resolution. They had prepared to offer stability, love, and opportunity, believing they were filling a void left by tragedy. Now that tragedy stood before them, demanding reversal. Their intentions, once unquestionably noble, were now subject to scrutiny and reinterpretation. Were they rescuers or opportunists who had benefited from another woman's erasure? The question lingered painfully, complicating every instinct to protect the child they had already begun to love. Will and Electra found themselves trapped between empathy and self-preservation. They could see the desperation etched into Luna's actions, recognize the trauma that had driven her to such extremes. Yet understanding did not lessen the threat she posed to their happiness, to the fragile equilibrium they had fought to build. Luna's presence reawakened old wounds, resurrected fears they had worked tirelessly to overcome. The future they envisioned now seemed contingent, vulnerable to the whims of a woman who had proven herself capable of extraordinary deception. Luna, for her part, oscillated between triumph and terror. Achieving visibility again did not bring the relief she had anticipated. Instead, it amplified her vulnerability. Every gaze reminded her of the risks she had taken, the bridges she had burned. She sensed judgment in the air, felt the weight of scrutiny pressing against her resolve. Yet retreat was no longer an option. To withdraw now would be to accept annihilation, to confirm that her life could be edited out without consequence. She clung to her claim with increasing ferocity, mistaking resistance for validation. The psychological landscape grew increasingly volatile as legal, emotional, and moral arguments collided. Luna's actions forced everyone involved to confront uncomfortable truths about ownership, identity, and the limits of forgiveness. Her fake death, once a survival strategy, now cast a long shadow over her credibility. Trust, once broken so completely, proved nearly impossible to restore. Each attempt by Luna to justify her choices only deepened suspicion, reinforcing the perception that she remained unpredictable, dangerous even. Yet beneath the chaos lay a more unsettling question. What if Luna was not entirely wrong? What if the system's eagerness for closure had indeed facilitated injustice? This possibility haunted the proceedings, injecting doubt into otherwise firm convictions. The absence of a body, once dismissed as a technicality, now loomed as a symbol of collective complicity. Everyone had wanted Luna gone, in one way or another, and her disappearance had granted that wish. Her return forced a reckoning not only with her actions, but with theirs. As tensions escalated, the child remained at the center, unknowingly embodying the consequences of adult failures and desires. For Luna, the child was proof that she mattered. For Katie and Bill, the child represented hope and continuity. For Will and Electra, the child had become entwined with their sense of family and future. These competing narratives clashed violently, creating a situation where compromise felt like betrayal to someone, no matter the outcome. Luna's internal conflict intensified as resistance mounted. She began to glimpse the cost of her obsession, the potential damage her return could inflict on the very life she claimed to protect. Moments of doubt surfaced, quickly suppressed by fear of losing everything again. She was trapped by her own strategy, compelled to push forward even as the path grew darker. The realization that survival had transformed into domination unsettled her, yet stepping back felt synonymous with disappearing once more. In the end, Luna's fake death achieved the opposite of its intended purpose. Instead of granting freedom, it bound her more tightly to unresolved conflict. Instead of erasing pain, it multiplied it, spreading uncertainty and fear through every life she touched. Her return exposed the fragility of narratives built on absence, the dangers of choosing convenience over truth. Whether Luna would ultimately reclaim her child or lose everything again remained uncertain, but one truth was undeniable. Death without a body is never an ending. It is an invitation for chaos, a promise that the past will return, demanding to be reckoned with. As the fallout continued, each character stood at a crossroads shaped by Luna's reappearance. Will and Electra faced the challenge of defending their future without surrendering their humanity. Katie and Bill confronted the limits of altruism when confronted with living consequences. Luna herself stood between redemption and self-destruction, forced to confront whether reclaiming her child could ever justify the harm she had caused. The story, once defined by loss, evolved into something far more unsettling, a meditation on identity, ownership, and the terrifying power of refusing to stay dead. Luna's sudden reappearance did not merely fracture the fragile calm that had settled after her supposed death, it detonated it. For Bill, the shock was visceral, almost physical. He had built his emotional defenses on certainty, on the belief that some chapters, once closed, remained sealed no matter how painful the ink. Seeing Luna alive tore through that belief with brutal force. It was not just disbelief that froze him in place, but a deeper, more unsettling sensation, the realization that his confidence in systems, reports, and finality had been misplaced. Bill had always trusted structure, legality, and order. Luna standing before him was proof that order could be manipulated, that truth could be staged, and that even death could be weaponized. In that moment, Bill was not merely stunned. He was destabilized, forced to confront how easily he had accepted a convenient ending. The shock lingered long after the initial encounter. Bill replayed every detail of the past in his mind, searching for cracks he might have missed, signs he should have questioned. He wondered how close Luna had been all this time, watching, waiting, calculating. The thought that she had observed him preparing to adopt her child, stepping into a role he believed was born of compassion, filled him with a creeping sense of violation. His intentions, once clear in his own conscience, now felt exposed, vulnerable to reinterpretation. Luna's presence transformed him from protector to potential usurper in the eyes of others, and that shift gnawed at him relentlessly. While Bill struggled with shock and guilt, Electra's reaction took a far darker turn. Where Bill was paralyzed by disbelief, Electra was consumed by fear. Luna's return did not register as a moral dilemma or a legal complication. It registered as a threat. To Electra, Luna was not simply a mother reclaiming her child or a woman clawing her way back into existence. She was an intruder, a destabilizing force capable of dismantling everything Electra had fought to secure. The past Electra shared with Will had been a hard one, shaped by trust rebuilt after pain, by choices made in the belief that certain ghosts were finally laid to rest. Luna's living presence resurrected those ghosts with terrifying clarity. Electra's fear quickly crystallized around a single, obsessive thought. Luna would take Will from her. Not through direct confrontation, not through overt seduction, but through something far more insidious. Luna knew Will intimately, understood his vulnerabilities, his guilt, his tendency to be drawn toward responsibility and redemption. Electra could already imagine the narrative Luna might spin, positioning herself as the wronged woman, the mother pushed to extremes, the victim of circumstances beyond her control. In that story, Will would not be a prize to be stolen, but a savior invited to step forward. The idea haunted Electra, turning every interaction, every glance, into a potential betrayal waiting to unfold. As Luna's presence became more entrenched, Electra's anxiety evolved into something colder, more deliberate. She began to see the situation not as a temporary crisis, but as an existential threat to her future. Words and negotiations felt inadequate, even dangerous. Luna thrived on chaos, on emotional leverage. Confronting her directly would only feed her sense of importance, give her more space to manipulate perceptions. Electra convinced herself that the only way to protect what she loved was to remove the threat entirely, not by exposure or argument, but by forcing fate's hand. The plan did not form overnight. It grew slowly, fed by sleepless nights and a mind spiraling through worst-case scenarios. Electra revisited past traumas, moments when accidents had rewritten lives in irreversible ways. She understood, with chilling clarity, how easily an unforeseen incident could shift narratives, silence questions, and restore order without leaving fingerprints. In her rationalization, she was not plotting harm. She was planning prevention. Luna was unstable, unpredictable, already proven capable of elaborate deception. If something happened to her, Electra reasoned, it would not be an act of cruelty, but a tragic inevitability stemming from Luna's own reckless return. Electra's internal conflict intensified as she wrestled with the moral implications of her thoughts. She did not see herself as a villain, and that self-image became the cornerstone of her justification. She loved Will. She wanted to protect their future, their family, the life they were building. Luna's existence threatened all of that, not just emotionally but structurally. Courts, public opinion, and guilt could all be manipulated by someone willing to fake death. Electra told herself that Luna had forfeited her right to safety the moment she chose deception over honesty. This belief allowed Electra to suppress the voice inside her that whispered warnings, replacing it with a steely resolve. The accident Electra envisioned was meant to be clean, untraceable, and tragically plausible. Not an act of rage, but of precision. She studied Luna's movements, her routines, the spaces where she existed on the margins. Luna was still adjusting to visibility, still navigating the world cautiously after months in hiding. That vulnerability presented opportunity. Electra observed from a distance, masking her intentions behind a facade of concern and composure. To everyone else, she appeared shaken but supportive, a woman grappling with an impossible situation. Only Electra knew how carefully she was mapping each step toward what she believed was a necessary conclusion. Meanwhile, Luna sensed the hostility growing around her, even if she could not yet name its source. Bill's shock had hardened into guardedness, and Will's reactions were layered with confusion and unresolved emotion. Luna interpreted these responses as evidence that her return was working, that her presence was forcing everyone to acknowledge her significance. Yet beneath her confidence lay a flicker of unease. She felt watched, evaluated, weighed not just morally, but strategically. The environment around her carried an undercurrent of tension that made her wary, though she attributed it to resentment rather than danger. The irony was cruel and profound. Luna, who had faked her own death to survive, now stood in real peril precisely because she had returned. Electra's plan advanced quietly, fueled by desperation and the conviction that she alone saw the truth of the threat Luna posed. Each passing day narrowed the margin for error, tightening the web around all of them. Bill remained caught between shock and responsibility, unaware that events were moving beyond legal battles and emotional confrontations into far darker territory. As Electra prepared to set her plan in motion, the atmosphere grew heavier, charged with unspoken dread. The past, once believed buried, now loomed over every decision, every step. Luna's survival had rewritten the rules, but Electra was determined to write the ending herself. What none of them fully grasped was that accidents, once unleashed, rarely obey the intentions of those who orchestrate them. In trying to protect her future, Electra was standing on the edge of a transformation she could not yet imagine, one that threatened to turn fear into irrevocable consequence and survival into something far more destructive than death itself.